Okay, we have the honor to have today at the Institute Professor André Lecours. Professor André Lecours teaches at the University of Ottawa, Department of Political Studies. He is a renowned specialist on federalism, nationalism, and he is also research coordinator for a think tank based in Quebec, l'Idée fédérale, and he's visiting Spain to discuss about accommodation of nationalism in plural democracies such as United Kingdom, Spain, Canada. And my first question is that we are now October 2015, is 20 years ago the referendum in Quebec about the independence of Quebec was held, and I would like to ask you, to ask a short assessment about how the situation in Quebec regarding secession and accommodation in the federal Canada is.
Well, it's taken an unpredictable turn, I would say, because right after the referendum there was a sense on the part of all involved, Quebecers and the government of Canada as well, that there would be an excellent chance for another referendum because the result was so close, it was 49.4%. So, and the independence option seemed to be on a steady rise. So there was a sense that it would continue rising. And to the surprise of many, it didn't. It kind of flatlined and has even gone down. So this is a situation that has no clear explanation. Some people would argue that the policies of the current government, the conservative government, which has consisted essentially in kind of minimizing frictions and interference, some would say, with provincial jurisdiction, that's been fruitful, right? So now, in the last 9 years in Canada, provincial governments and the federal governments have essentially stayed out of each other's ways. So that's a possibility. Others point to factors that are more internal to Quebec, right? The fact that there's a whole new generation of Quebecers that hasn't really experienced the mega constitutional politics of the past, which were very conflictual and which ended up being kind of very binary. It was either you were with Canada or you were with Quebec, So the youth in Quebec is not as likely to support secession as it was 20 years ago. And perhaps as a result of that, support for independence is as low as it's been in the last 40 years. I mean, it's still around 35%, which is substantial. It means that, it's certainly Canada as a state hasn't convinced an entirety of the Quebec population. But independence is much less discussed as something very likely than it's been in the past.
I see. As you have mentioned, in that referendum 20 years ago, 49% of Quebec voters voted in favor of independence. We had elections last month in Catalonia, not a referendum, but, as we know, 48% of voters voted for parties defending secession. So, with the experience of Canada and also the experience perhaps of the United Kingdom, are there any lessons to be learned how to deal with secession demands, how to deal with federal institution design, or how to deal with an accommodation of nationalism in plural advanced democracies, and for the case of Spain that we can import?
Well, I think importing strategy is always difficult. Everything's very contextual. I think at the most basic level, I would say dialogue is really important. I mean, that's something that in Canada comes through institutions because of our federal system. There are a very dense network of intergovernmental relations. And even when politicians choose not to speak, there is still dialogue because civil servants and bureaucrats are typically on an ongoing conversation. So specifically, in every department in Canada, whether at the provincial or federal level, there's an intergovernmental relations office. So that conversation is always there. Now, I think that the conversation obviously, needs to be framed, right? I mean, those are such difficult issues about, who's a nation and who has a right to self-determination. There's a lot of emotions in there. So I think there's a certain amount of carefulness to have with respect to how you conduct those conversations, but I think they do need to happen. And obviously, I mean, Canada's own method has been essentially to work through federalism, to work through territorial political autonomy. And I do think there is some room to go in that direction in Spain. Now, to what extent do we want to go is something that needs to be negotiated, I guess, and appreciated by the different actors. But I do think that policies can make a difference in terms of softening up or hardening support for secession. So I don't think we want to start with the idea that nothing can be done about this and that a position of kind of avoidance is the best position. Maybe it's something that can work by default, right? So if you prevent a referendum on self-determination, of course you won't have to live with the result of the vote. But in the longer term, I mean, I'm wondering what the effects of that are on the identity of Catalans, of course, so their willingness to be part of the Spanish political community, and of course you want, as a Spaniard, you want to avoid secession, but if possible, you would like to also avoid a situation, which is partly present in Quebec, to be honest with you, where, a good part of people don't feel that they belong to this kind of statewide political community.
This is a fascinating and emotional topic that we will follow with attention. We will see. Thank you very much, Professor Lecours, for coming to the Elcano Institute to discuss about this topic. And goodbye. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.